Chile and California, which of course it is so important. This is an initiative that is being sponsored by ASESOL, Generadores de Chile, and the World Energy Council. So thank you very much to our sponsors, which give us the opportunity to have this conversation. Today, we have an interesting topic. Interesting at a local level, but also it is a topic of a high global interest, where Chile has a huge opportunity in order to become a world leader in this. I'm talking about the green hydrogen, and especially we're going to talk about the challenges related to the transition to the inclusion of green hydrogen here in Chile, and also the experience that we have had in California. In order to do so, today we have three panelists. Great panelists in this conversation. We have panelists both from Chile and also from California. And I will start welcoming each of them. So later, of course, we can start our conversation. So first of all, from the Ministry of Energy, we have Max Correa. He's the head of Fuels and New Energy Division. He has served as Executive Director of the Solar and Energy Innovation Committee of Corfo, and previously as a Deputy Director of Strategy and Sustainability at Corfo. Max is on the board of the directors of the Chile Natural Resources Information Center, Chilean, part of the Ministry of Agriculture, and also City Council of a municipality in Zapallar. Max also graduated from Universidad de Chile, Faculty of Law, and he has a Master MP HD, Environmental Policy, and he has also developed a certificate of innovation and entrepreneurship at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University. So, Max, you're most welcome. It is a pleasure to have you here in this conversation. We, from California, we also have Marianne Borgeson. We're going to have simultaneous interpretation. So, Miriam, we're going to have this conversation in Spanish. I know that you're receiving this interpretation, and in case of any questions, of course, you can raise your hand. Miriam, she's from the Natural Resources Defense Council. She works closely with policymakers and stakeholders at the state, regional, and national level. Prior to joining NRDC, she worked as a team leader of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. She also has a Stanford license from California University in Berkeley, Energy and Resource Group, and an MBA of the Hayes School of Business, Berkeley, and also Marianne lives in California. So you're most welcome, Marianne, to this conversation today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Marcela Angulo. She is the director of the Santiago headquarters of Universidad Concepcion. She is counselor of our Chile California Council. Thank you very much for being here. Marcela is director of the Santiago headquarters of Universidad Concepcion, civil engineer with specialization in hydraulic and sanitary, and doctor in environmental sciences from Universidad Concepcion, with more than 20 years of experience in sustainability, innovation, and technology transfer issues. She has been manager of technological capabilities of the Production Development Corporation, Corfo, corporate sustainability manager at Anglo American Copper Operations, vice president of the Water Resources Commission of the Mining Council, member of the Sustainability and Energy and Climate Change Commission, and manager of Environment and Energy and Foundation Chile. She previously worked at university research on environmental issues as well. So you're most welcome, Marcela. It is a pleasure to have you here in this conversation today. Thank you very much, Etienne. It is my pleasure to be here, being part of this panel. So the two being said, I have to be accurate. I'm really proud. Max, it is important to have two women in this panel. I mean, of course, we all feel proud to have women in this panel. Absolutely. So now we're going to start. We're going to have a conversation. We have some questions, and if you have to comment on what some the other panelists have said, you can do it as well. Max, I want to start with you. The first question is green hydrogen a feasible option? And what are the perspectives do you see for the development in the next 10 years, 2025, 2030, 2040, and for the future? If it is feasible or not, we believe that it is, absolutely, yes. So that's why we're working the strategy, and we're also working really hard in its implementation, because Chile has some advantages, comparative advantages, which are unique for the electricity production, which is renewable, which is the very base for the hydrogen production and its derivatives. Now the world goes on that direction, and hydrogen, it is one key element in the transition, energy transition. It is not the solution for everything. The electrification, it is also an important trend, but there are many different sectors which will require hydrogen in order to decarbonize their activities, to have an alternative to the use of fossil fuels burning. So the world, it is getting ready, and we have seen it, and we have seen it physically in different trips that we have done. And we're going to do some other trips at the very end of this year. So if it is feasible here in Chile, yes, I mean, the question, I think it is related to if we're going to be, as a country, if we're going to be able to capture this opportunity. The ingredients are there. The challenge now it is if we are going to be able to get into an agreement so as to have an industry around a green industry towards hydrogen and its derivatives. And if, as a country, we're going to be able to develop it. So we're faithful that that's going to be like that. We're working on that. But as you well said, the past of years in the country does not guarantee this to happen. So therefore, we need to work from the public sector and from the private one, from the academia as well, and the civil society, in order to get into an agreement, in order to obtain a short, medium, and long-term development of this industry. The signals so far have been so positive. When you ask me about 2025, 2030, and 40, in 2025, that's a date, that's a year, that it is easy to set some milestones every 5 years. And also when decades, but 2025 is quite significant because in many countries have set some requirements for that year to have big projects. I mean, producing this. For instance, Germany has a program which is called Age Global, which basically what it does, what Germans do, it is with a big subsidy. They bid the purchase of clean fuels for Germany, so then later can sell it. They sell the same fuels within the European market, and they're going to pay this price difference, this green premium, as it is called, with the fuels they want to replace too. And in 2025, it is the time deadline for these projects are going to start using or receiving molecules of these clean fuels in Europe. And that is aligned with what we're doing with Corfo in this subsidy tender. Corfo has given $50 million, and one of the requirements, 2025, I mean, Germany says 2024, but at Corfo, it is 2025. I mean, this project must be operating already. So in the years to come, projects, and for projects to be operating in 2025, it has to start today. They need to do the engineering studies, baselines, environmental impact. So we believe that for 2025, the first projects at big scale will be ready. And for 2030, will be many more. And for 2040, what we're expecting is the industry is to be mature. So we have diversified many different projects and different sizes all through the country. And that's what we see with the trends. What what the council said, this association gathering all of global companies of hydrogen. So I believe that we are on the right path and we are okay with the deadlines. We need to act fast, but we're aligned with the deadlines, global deadlines, for entering into hydrogen at a great scale. Thank you very much, Maxim. We're going to continue with these implementation challenges a little bit later in this conversation and the roles of the different stakeholders. So far, uh, Miriam, I have a question for you related to your experience in California about the different uses of hydrogen and where you have done an analysis to know where it is more beneficial from the viewpoint of reduction of emissions.
Yeah, in California, I think we are also just getting started with figuring out the role for hydrogen. There's been talk of it being used to replace electric generation from gas generators, interest in sort of the industries that are hard to electrify, such as aviation, shipping, steel manufacturing. But I actually think it's important to take a step back and remember all the ways that hydrogen is currently being used globally. Right now, hydrogen is largely being used for oil refining, for ammonia production, and for heat processes, as well as to manufacture methanol. In California, it's mostly oil refining, like 99% of the hydrogen in California is for oil refining. And there's just a huge production of dirty hydrogen currently happening all across the globe. So one of the most important places to actually think about green hydrogen is to displace this dirty hydrogen. The amount of emissions that are coming from all the hydrogen being produced globally is larger than all the emissions from the country of Germany. It's very, very significant. Another interesting stat that I think is worth noting is that if you replaced all of the current dirty hydrogen with green electrolytic hydrogen from renewables, it would require all of the wind and solar that we have built in the entire world to generate that hydrogen. It takes a lot of electricity to create hydrogen. And so in California, I'm hoping and working with the government to encourage us to think of it as a really rare and precious resource that should be used in really targeted ways. And so I think, especially as we hopefully ramp down oil refining, I'm hoping that the main uses of hydrogen in California will be for things like aviation, shipping, maybe some steel manufacturing where you do need a high heat source, and perhaps even in really targeted ways to generate electricity so that we can balance out our grid, which will be increasingly renewable from wind and sun. So it's really in these targeted ways that it makes the most sense, given its cost and the overall inefficiency of using hydrogen. It's we see it as a pretty precious resource that should be targeted in really specific ways.
Muchas gracias, Marianne. Thank you very much, Marianne. I don't know, Max or Marcela would like to comment on that topic. I see that you are you're nodding, huh? That is true. Yes. I'm sorry, Marcela, I was nodding because it ratifies what we have been saying so far. And that is, with that diagnosis, is what we're working with. But I totally agree with what Marianne has said. I totally agree. Yes, yes, I absolutely agree. That is, there is a direct correlation between the availability of clean energy and competitive energy and the possibility of producing hydrogen at a great scale for domestic uses and also for thinking as the export of hydrogen and its derivates. Ammoniac, hydrogen, or some other forms of subproducts, e-fuels. There is a possibility of connecting that world with the capture of carbon and produce clean fuels from hydrogen as a driver. And on that line, and from the academia, what is the role of the academia? What role can it play in the development of a green hydrogen market research? I mean, here in Chile. I want to be quite pragmatic in terms of here in Chile, we have a national system of innovation, which is rather small and it has limited resources. So therefore, from the viewpoint of technology and production technology of hydrogen from the electrolysis, maybe we are 20 or 30 years late in comparison with some other countries in the world. So therefore, my personal opinion is that probably we cannot do much in that field from the space of innovation, local space of innovation for our local ecosystem. Nonetheless, I am convinced that we have a great innovation space in innovations or uses of hydrogen. And here I want to connect with the vision that we have from Universidad de Concepción. And we're working on that because hydrogen could be a driver of decarbonization and competitiveness for our industries, which are now set here or installed here in Chile. And therefore, especially those industries exporting or which are part of this value chain, which end up in markets which are being more sensitive to this carbon print. Many countries are showing their commitment of neutral carbonity for 2040 and 50. There are huge industries, producers, which will have to do big efforts to reduce their carbon print, and renewable energies are, of course, are a huge ally. But there are some areas where electrification is rather hard. So therefore, hydrogen has a role to has a very important role there. And I want to give two examples. In the mining industry, that is one of the most important industries here in Chile. We see, and Marianne has commented on that, the industry of the steel, it is moving towards producing steel with zero emissions. So that is done by using hydrogen as a reducing element or, or element for the reduction of the elements, the reduction to convert iron into steel. So the same technology can be used in our industry, copper industry. Copper is going to be a precious metal for the energy transition, for the renewable energies as well, and for the industry of electromobility, electric cars. So therefore, our industry, mining industry of copper is going to be highly demanded in order to transform the productive process, and hydrogen has a role, important role, and it has it in all of the scopes of the carbon footprint in 1, 2, and 3. In number 1, which are direct emissions, the concept of reduction of minerals with hydrogen, it can also be applied here at Universidad de Concepción. We're working with a technology which is quite disruptive, which substitute the traditional smelting of copper for a process which is equivalent to what steel with zero emission, with oxidation of minerals, and then later reduction with green hydrogen. But hydrogen can also be used in an important way in the mobility, within the mining industry, with dual combustion, diesel and hydrogen, or with fuel cells in some mining trucks. And also in the third scope, which are all of the inputs used in the mining, explosive based in ammoniac and also ammonia, and the possibility of the trips and transportation, maritime transportation could also be benefited with the uses of hydrogen. And just like in the mining industry, there are many others which also have a huge potential. Cellulose and paper industry, where Chile is also a leader, it also has a huge possibility for using hydrogen with a logic of refining logics, circular economy. So our vision it is that the academia has an important role to do some research, applied innovation for our own industries to transform hydrogen into a driver of competitiveness and also to decarbonization. Thank you very much, Marcela. Interesting opportunity, which is getting opened for our industry related to the global markets of export of services and supply services related to the industry in global markets. I think that is an important element related to that. So, Max, talking about the role of the government to support this development, we talked about the academia. So what's your vision? How do you see this from the government? Well, some time ago, we took the decision of having an active role here for the promotion of this, hydrogen and this industry, because it has multiple benefits for the country. And decarbonization is also important, and we want to achieve our goals of decarbonization, and this accounts for 21%, and also the possibility through this to create a new industry to export this from Chile. So this is an industry which is clean, which is going to give new works, new sources of income for give well-being to the country. So we're having an active role. And when we started, in this we said we should give this a politic related to emissions. And this basically it is being able to unite all of the wills, all of the viewpoints related to topics to have a common goal. So we're all rowing in the same direction, going into the same direction. This is the long-term vision shared by society. And this is the most important element that we have in the strategy. This is what we want to do. In the US, it's like the moonshot, right? Or like the Biden management, they are talking about the air shot, this huge challenge to save the planet from this crisis, environmental crisis, this climate emergency we're living or going through. So we're seeing hydrogen, the development of the industry of hydrogen with that viewpoint, global viewpoint of view. Now, we need to work in multiple places. We're working in regulations, permits, infrastructure, studies of what is going to be required, what is the necessary infrastructure to develop this, different public goods for in order to support the private world, because this strategy lies on the action of private sector, their commitment, they're taking the risk, they're investing. So that is the nature of our economy, political economy. But we're also going beyond. We're also trying to, as I said before, we're getting opportunities from promoting through incentives, as this Corfo contest, also with the help of multilateral banks, we're also getting different tenders, subsidies in order to advance in some studies of pre-feasibility. So, because we know that many incentive is required in an early stage if we want to accelerate the development of this industry, because that's what the strategy is about, to anticipate the use of hydrogen in different applications before it is competitive on its own. So it get to its break even, economic break even. We want to accelerate because there is an urgency. So therefore, we need not only to have the field, the pitch ready, but we need to promote and to give some economic incentives. We're also working with some other economic tools, the revision, for instance, of diesel, the specific tax in comparison with fuels, green taxes that should be widened in terms of scope and amounts. We're also considering a mechanism for ETS, ETS elements, which are some permits. So we're seeing how we can supply or give the market with different instruments so it can accelerate this process. Of course, we're also working with or talking with the potential buyers in the domestic field, the mining industry that Marcela just mentioned. It is a key stakeholder. They use so much diesel nowadays in all of their different processes. Mobile applications, big trucks, mining trucks. They consume millions of cubic meters of diesel, thousands of liters per day, each of them. So hydrogen may be an alternative with faster, that might work faster in the mining industry. And as Marianne well said, I mean, this gray hydrogen is being used, and we could also work in order to avoid that. So in the agricultural sector, there could be also some opportunities to so as to create demand. So producers can also use these new fuels. We're also working in cooperation, international cooperation. We have signed some agreements, interest memorandum with interest ports where fuels are going to get into to Singapore, for instance, Rotterdam, and Amret, where we know that countries are going to import this methanol, this green ammonia, synthetic fuels to achieve their own goals of decarbonization. So we have a strong line of work, which is it considers international cooperation to position Chile as a country where we are going to produce and in a safe fashion these fuel clean fuels at a competitive price. Today, we have launched a new study, which is about to be finished, with the Institute of Energy Economic of Japan, in order to guarantee the Asian market that our numbers, what we're offering, we're saying we're going to be so competitive in the hydrogen production, and we're going to be able to transport it to different consumption centers. So they are going to, so far the results, preliminary results show Chile as a competitive country, even more competitive than Australia, which is even closer from Japan. Because truly, the potential of production of renewable energy of the Atacama Desert with solar energy and the winds of Patagonia make Chile to get positioned in order to produce this in a more competitive fashion. So we're also working in certifications, because it is also important to inform consumers of the ones who are going to buy this in the market. This, I mean, clean chemicals. It is important to let them know that what was produced here in Chile was produced without this carbon print. It was 100% produced in a responsible way with an energy which is 100% renewable. So we're working also in human capital. We're also working with innovation initiatives. With Marcela, we have also talked. We're constantly talking. We're really attentive to what this alliance is doing. Strategic, I mean, at the BOBO strategy alliance. This is a policy towards a vision. We need to be working all together with a common goal, common horizon, taking charge, of course, of difficulties that may arise on the path, on the road. So the role we're having, it is a role which is not the traditional one that we see oftentimes from the public, because the energy ministry, it is also setting a timeline for regulations, but it's also going beyond, because we have the conviction that this is necessary and that it is also possible. Thank you very much, Matt. And on that line, I'd like to cover two topics related to regulations and incentives. And Marianne, in your experience, which are the highlights or the state of this debate in terms of regulations and also related to incentives in the development of green hydrogen?
Yeah, and so in California, we're also just getting started with the sort of regulation and incentive side. There's a bunch of work that needs to be done to figure out, can you put hydrogen into our existing gas pipelines, what the injection standards are for that, can you do it safely, how much of that hydrogen will potentially just leak into the atmosphere, and how that may embrittle the pipeline itself. We have a lot of natural gas in California. So most, 90% of our homes are powered with gas. So there's a lot of questions of, can you replace natural gas with some amount of hydrogen in the pipeline? So that's one area of regulation. Another is just considering if we should require, and this is literally being actively considered right now at the Public Utilities Commission, should we require future gas generators to use a portion of hydrogen in their production of electricity? Should the state require that? If so, how much? And how is that sort of compared to other options for cleaning up our electricity supply? I'd say it's still in a pretty early stage knowing what hydrogen can do. I think that the more important investments for governments right now, at least in California, is going to be some of the early stage development. In the state budget right now, or the state budget that's going to be considered early next year, I think we'll end up investing a couple $100 million into electrolysis technology and potentially also into gasification technology of woody biomass into hydrogen. So some of these early technologies where we're not even sure, how much can the cost come down, how would gasification work, for example, and then some of the applications are pretty diverse, as we've talked about. So I still see us in sort of like the piloting stage rather than requiring at scale hydrogen to be used in a certain way. I agree with Max, there's like a huge and very important role for government, both in creating a reliable enough demand for at least a small amount of green electrolytic hydrogen going forward so that the industry has reason to invest and develop new projects, without overbuilding or sort of making investments that you may regret later, whether that's in like a new, very expensive hydrogen pipeline, or in developing infrastructure in a way that maybe in 10 years you realize wasn't the right choice. So there's this really tricky role for governments right now. There's also this question of the role of renewables and like how should the renewable electricity best be used. I think we and what we've heard today from Marcela and Max as well, like there's a need to electrify as many things as possible with the renewable electricity resources we have. We don't want to create too much of a pull from hydrogen that we're actually raising the prices of those renewable electricities for some core uses in our economies. So there is a really important role for government of sort of managing who gets what resource and sort of what are the economic drivers influencing the price of electricity in the states. Just as one example of a way that we're concerned that hydrogen might be used, if you replace, is using hydrogen in homes, it would take about 5 times as much renewable electricity to heat a home with hydrogen than to heat a home with electricity with a super efficient heat pump. So you want to make sure you're not making uneconomic choices that will sort of hurt in the long run in terms of the best use of the resources you have. And so there's different ways that hydrogen might be used. I think one application, and a lot of the hydrogen developers that we've talked to are really interested in off-grid hydrogen as well. And that may be of interest in places like if you have a mining facility that's not connected to a large transmission line, but you could actually develop the hydrogen right on site and not have to pay for expensive transmission. Sometimes, at least the developers we're talking to are looking at developing their own renewables and then maybe adding some grid electricity to increase the capacity factor for their electrolyzers. But I actually think it might be interesting in places where there's lack of grid capacity to just develop hydrogen on site for certain industrial or other uses. There may also be an opportunity to sort of balance the grid with hydrogen, but I think that's going to be a much smaller use, just given all the competing uses for electricity, at least in the California situation.
Muchas gracias, Marianne. No sé si Marcela.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Max? Marcela, would you like to comment alongside that line due to the local context of what we're living? Because we are at an early stage of development here in Chile. Marcela, would you like to proceed? Yes, I will go first. On transmission and trade-off, I mean, you can be in charge of that. I totally agree with Marianne in terms of we need to be quite pragmatic in terms of which are the niches where hydrogen can have a real possibility to compete in a better way than the electricity, traditional electrification systems. So we need to be responsible on how we address these processes and this curve of learning. Because yes, there are some hypotheses that show that hydrogen is going to compete well in some spaces, and there is where we should concentrate our efforts in advancing in this learning curve, in doing some piloting, in projecting how that application would be at an industrial scale, doing some or having some assumptions on how we're going to lower the capital. So in that way we can project with some trust and certainty, which is the exact moment in which an initiative of this nature has to get into operation. And not to accelerate, we need to find a balance in terms of not to accelerate too much those applications which are not going to be competitive. So therefore, Max can also comment on this, on where it makes sense to have some hydrogen applications with the electricity produced in situ versus a good system, electric system with a good transmission and a good certification mechanism that allows to do the traceability of the energy that is being received by this hydrogen production. Totally agree with Marianne and Marcela. And our strategy for carbon neutrality is aligned with that. You have to see where it is more cost efficient. And in that case, hydrogen is not away from those regulations or rules. To obtain this carbon neutrality here in Chile, currently it is simple to understand, but not simple to installed. First of all, you clean the matrix of electricity generation. A huge percent comes from carbon, 20% from gas, and you need to clean, defossilize the electricity creation with renewable sources. And then later, having that, or in parallel, having the renewable energy or electricity available, you need to widen the electrical use of different sectors of the economy. Industrial sectors, what the mining industry is doing, for instance, in homes. I totally agree with, I mean, this is scientist fact that the heating or cooling a house with hydrogen versus electricity with a pump, heat pump, which is efficient, it makes no sense in theory, except in some special situations, but it is to use the energy in the most efficient way. So that electricity, as I said before, since there are some bonuses, but there are some places where it is possible to create this electrification. Those are the places which are hard to decarbonize. So there, hydrogen makes more sense. So that is aligned to what Marianne just said. It is aligned with our strategy for carbon neutrality and the strategy for hydrogen. Now, sometimes for the ones who are not from Chile, and for some people here in Chile, they're not thinking that Chile not only has renewable resources of a good quality, good factor of plant, as it is called, plant factor for producing solar energy and wind power, but it is also quite abundant. So the latest estimations is changes because technology also is improved, but we have calculated that we can produce at least 80 times, 80 times more electricity than our current matrix currently installed. So we can electrify a lot. We can electrify practically all of the sectors of our economy. We could all be driving an electric car being fed by renewable electricity, but we still have a huge accident. And this is not trying to cover the northern part of the country with solar panels. That is not the main goal. But hydrogen opens the door to base these accidents, to use these accidents of electricity to export them and to use them in different activities. So electricity being used in a more cost-efficient way, I believe that we're not having that problem really. Thank you, Marianne. I don't know if you'd like to, after, I mean, would you like to comment? Would you like to share something else?
No, I mean, I think we're well aligned. It makes sense.
Entonces quisiera tocar otro de los puntos
I'd
que
like to go to another topic that Max just mentioned. This is a question for Marcela that has to do with the human capital. What are the challenges and opportunities that you're seeing? How relevant, how critical this could be in the the development of the human capital related to this industry? And maybe Max can also complement later with the opportunities, social opportunities, the generation of jobs, which is also part of the strategy, which, the strategy was also addressed. Well, thank you for the question. This is a highly important topic because here in Chile, we have lived an experience which was equivalent when solar energy got us by surprise. Competitiveness of solar energy, photovoltaic solar energy, got us by surprise. And there was an unfolding of solar energy, and we didn't have the technical or professionals prepare for that. I always remember that some anecdotes where the former president and the current president inaugurated some solar plants, and they found that most of the workers there mounting those plants were from abroad, from Europe, Bulgaria, and so on. So what happened there was that this is a typical failure of coordination where we talk where in innovation systems occur. There's a coordination. It is not a market failure. It is a coordination failure. Same situation, which is first, the hand of the egg, offer or demand. because we need to project how the demand's going to be and which are going to be the qualifications which are going to be required at a technical level, professional level, at advanced human capital. It is something that are rather complex. And we need to try to do a collaborative work between the industry and the offer world formative. I'm talking about the professional institutes, universities, so as to project through time and to align the formative offer with the demand. So this is quite sensitive because it is bad to arrive late. It is also bad to accelerate too much, to go too fast, because you may create huge expectations in young people, training professionals, technicians, professionals, which are not going to find uh, a job. So this is a typical activity where the role of the state, and in this case, the ministry is doing it, it is a key element for creating this coordination. So we have clarity on how the demand is going to be in terms of human capital, with which type of qualifications, so the formative and training can adapt so as to create professionals and technicians which are required at the proper time. So here, there's a lot to do from educational centers, higher education centers, because we have, on the one hand, this need of having a formative offer in the long term, but we also need to do things to reconvert competences of people who are now working. So fastly could get those new competencies or skills so as to start working in this project, which are going to be the first one in this pipeline of initiatives which are going to be implemented. Max, the national strategy, how did you address this human capital? Which are the challenges you see for the future? Of course, we need to consider experts as Marcela. They know the topic so well. I coincide with her. I agree with her. We're aware of this risk of timing, right? We don't want to create false expectations. So we're working in a coordinated fashion with the ministry through the human capital table with the universities in order to so they because we all need to get educated about this. We need to get trained in what it really means to develop this industry and how it's going to be projected through time so as to be coordinated and uh, overcome these coordination failures. And from the ministry, we're trying to supply public goods studies which analyze this and that also see which profiles of skills are going to be required in each of the stages or the chain value in the production of hydrogen and when. Because we need to have a clear diagnosis in order to face the problem in the best way. So the good news about it is that hydrogen, green hydrogen, this new industry associated to it, it is an integration of processes which are known, where there will be more demand and more jobs, and that is going to be the creation, production of electricity, where the solar parks, photovoltaic parks, and solar concentration of power, electric parks, wind parks, and the operation maintenance of them, it is going to be required. And here in Chile, as Marcela well said at the beginning, there were some anecdotes where there were many people from abroad, many people from Europe, Spain, and not so many Chilean people. Well, that has changed through time. So we see that we're prepared for that. So then later, going or advancing in this value chain, it is quite similar to the industry of the petrochemical industry, the management of industrial gases. Today in Chile, we are rather prepared to cope with this huge demand of new projects with human capital from the country. This is within something even bigger. That has to do with the total value, which not only the human capital, which is proper qualified or skillful or with different profiles, which we're going to have and required in the country, we also need to be able to add value here in Chile. And Marcela knows a lot about that because, and to picture this, to the ones who have not had this or not face this situation. I mean, in the future, if we want to develop something in Magallanes and wind power plant in Magallanes, it doesn't really make sense to import these turbines from, or maybe concrete from other parts of the world. We should be able to, at least to build the towers here in Chile in order to advance and in order to build some of the elements. But we need to create, we need to add value here in Chile. And that is also part of the strategy. And what I want to tell you is that the Ministry of Energy is inviting all of the other sectors from the public and private to add, to help us to think all together, because we are not the Ministry of Science. We're not CORFO. We're not the Ministry of Work. We're not the Ministry of Education. We all need to try, and coming back to what I said, this policy towards a mission, we all need to have a common horizon and we all need to work together. We are gathering and making diagnosis of needs, opportunities, same Marcel is doing. And we all need to adhere to this project. So it is a collaborative work, more than a leadership from the Ministry of Energy, which is going to solve. So this is a work that we all need to do all together. Thank you very much, Max and Marcela. I want to ask Marianne if you can tell us a little bit how you have seen there in California the importance of and the training of this human capital.
Yeah, I think hydrogen is actually a good story in that it's not a totally new skill, and I think Marcella and Max both touched on this. It's not at all a foreign skill. So a lot of the existing industries and the existing labor unions and the workforces who are in the gas industry and then are also already building the renewables, those are the folks who are going to scale up, and maybe there'll be some slight tuning of skill sets. You know, a hydrogen pipeline is different than a gas pipeline, but fundamental skills are really the same. And really, most of the jobs are going to be coming from massively scaling up the renewables industry. So you guys and California, the country of Chile and California both already have the training centers, the sort of fundamental skill sets in universities and other workforce training centers to be able to just massively scale up the number of people available to install the wind and solar that we need. So it's a much better story than some new technologies where there might be a totally new skill set or something that's very foreign. I mean, the big difference is that you'll have electrolyzers that you will have to manage, and there's not that many jobs associated with that, though, compared to just the generating all the electricity needed to create the hydrogen.
There's an important and relevant point, which is transformations of the job markets. How human capital, there are people going from one industry to another. And of course, they are upscaling. There's an important point. And Marcela, she's also a counselor of the Chile California Council. Maybe, I don't know, she can tell us how from the council we can promote the cooperation in terms of training of human capital between Chile and California. So that is something we should take note about. I'd like to go into another topic, which has to do with this trade-off between production of local consumption and export. And I'd like to see, Marcela, how you see that there could be a trade-off between production for the local consumption versus the production for export due to the huge competitive position that we have in this industry. Well, personally, I think there's no trade-off. It is not one or the other. These are markets which are complementary. And of course, most probably, the domestic consumption is going to be benefited for the scale economies and also due to the learning curves which are going to occur at a local level from these huge projects which are going to be oriented to export or exporting. This is not a contraposition. We need to be quite smart in order to take the most of the synergies and these scale economies. Furthermore, probably Max can comment about it, but this vision that the Clean Energy Ministerial, where Chile was the host before COP26, where this mission was launched, sixth version, I guess, mission innovation, and one of those was hydrogen. And there they are talking about the concept of valleys or hubs of hydrogen, which are projects where there's a lot of stakeholders, not only one consuming or producing for itself, but also there's a collective viewpoint, collaborative viewpoint, view of many stakeholders, which at a certain territory can take the most of synergies and scale economies of a production project for our hydrogen for different uses. So therefore they can have many uptakers. One is for export, some of them is for local consumption. And that is going to, I mean, this is going to be what will allow these projects to be competitive earlier than individually. So I don't see a contraposition here. I see synergies. So that is the type of projects that we should promote. In this program, Strategic Alliance for Green Hydrogen at Biobío, we are observing a hub of hydrogen in the industrial zone of Talcahuano. There we have oil refinery, which consumes hydrogen. We have a steel, cement plant. We also have, there's distribution of natural gas from there. So we can do the blending of gas and hydrogen. So we have the ports, logistic for so if we can create these projects in a collaborative fashion, we're going to make them even more competitive at an earlier stage. There are many costs of transactions related, of course, so that's why the role of the incentives, which the state is offering through the minister and Corfa, may also help this to happen. But Germany is doing it with half of Hamburg. We are also seeing it that in Europe, there's a lot of culture of collaborative work amongst different countries and different regions and sectors. And I believe that we should learn from that experience, and we should also bring it to accelerate the incoming of the hydrogen economy in the country. We have a question, which Max may answer. How can we lower the cost of production in order to export it at a competitive way? Max, would you like to talk about it? Well, first of all, congratulations, Friends Marcela, for your answer. I totally agree on what you have said. We see with good eyes when there are projects with different local actors and they create a smart project to eliminate the barriers, different barriers. Hydrogen Valley is a good example of that. Now we're also, the market also chooses where to bet on. And I believe that it works parallelly with projects with local or export projects. So more than credits, as Marcela well said, we need, I mean, they can be complemented, but in terms of cost, how can we reduce cost? I believe that from Chile, Chile is not going to, will not try to, will not try to lower the cost of hydrogen at a global level. Nowadays, between 60 or 80% of the cost of production, it is electricity, renewable electricity. And in Chile, Chile is well positioned in that sense. We saw it in the last bidding for regulated customers. We got prices which were quite competitive in all Latin America. There were some bidders which got to $13 per megawatts, record prices in terms of concentration of solar concentrations. So in terms of electricity generation, which is renewable, which is the main component of the cost of hydrogen, Chile is really well positioned. But then later, where there's more space for reducing the cost, it is in the components, water, I mean, downstream electrolysis. There's a huge projection of growth for electrolyzers with different technologies, specialization of technologies. But the production of an electrolyzer is small. It is a not technology, but it is not so much used. So there should be a component with where we could reduce costs, but Chile is not going to lead that. It's going to import those electrolyzers produced in, there are many competitors in different parts of the world, Europe, Asia mainly. And the plant balance related to the electrolyzer, and then later the final product, which is ammoniac or ethanol. There's a plenty of place for innovation there and reduction of costs because hydrogen is living a important moment of related to impressions, and that is a virtuous circle of innovation and reduction of cost, scaling as well. So these projects are going to reduce their costs as the components of the productions are also lowering their costs, and also because of the size and the scale of projects. There are clear scale economies identified here. So the developers are going to face the dilemma of if they create a big project today that improves numbers today, I'm going to set a price, but I'm going to be out of some possible reductions of costs in the different components which are going to come in 10 more years. So that is a dilemma, and therefore it also requires some support intervention, state intervention, as many countries are doing. But if we set it today, the production of hydrogen and ammonia here in Chile, if the projects were, for instance, the context of Corfo that I just mentioned, if the prices are quite close for many different applications and they are competitive. For instance, in terms of ammoniac, green ammoniac, traditional ammoniac has a base of reformation of gas, which it's rather expensive because gas is expensive. But sometimes it is at a lower price when there is bigger offer of gas in the world. But when you have a green hydrogen project, and you produce ammonia, you set a price, and they're getting to prices similar to $500 per ton, which is quite attractive. There's some other uses which are going to be more difficult to you because you need to compete on what you want to replace. But prices are getting closer to be competitive. And Chile, in that sense, is going to be in that track especially if they develop big scale projects, reducing costs, competing with projects in Oman, Saudi Arabia, Australia, and some other countries. Thank you very much, Max. We have a couple of minutes, and before we have a last round for each of you, I wanted to ask Marcela, in your view, which are the elements that should be avoided in this adoption of green hydrogen, and which are the risks in the expansion of its use? In just 1 minute, please. I believe that, not from the technical viewpoint, because we have talked about it already in some other conversations. So there's a big risk, which is we're not able to convince citizenship that this is a huge opportunity for Chile, and that this may be just for some elite or big actors, economic actors, and this does not permeate or creates a benefit which is more tangible for the public. So, well, projects for export projects are going to be important because they will allow us to be competitive, and they will allow us to be competitive before some other competitors, but we still need to be able to show the citizenship, and we need to show some virtuous uses of hydrogen in an internal way, because otherwise we're going to have opposition. And if we're not able to explain to citizens that there's a benefit for everyone here, not only for decarbonize the rest of the world, we're going to be a supplier for others to achieve their goals. Well, in that sense, we may have a problem. So that is a dimension which is important to consider. We need to be clear about it. Same in terms of eliminating the myths in terms of security. And we're working at BioBio with the firefighters. So they also spread this topic. So this is, so hydrogen It is another source of energy, which is also accepted by all of the public. Thank you, Marcela. One more minute. I'd like to ask you to leave a message to the audience in just a few seconds, a message related to this topic and the huge opportunity which it is. I'd like to start with Marianne.
Yeah, I think and this builds on what Max and Marcella just said. I think when you have as the basis that you are going to be scaling up affordable renewables as your hydrogen policy, if that's the basis, that's going to be a no regrets solution because you could use that electricity in so many different ways, depending on how the technologies develop. You could use that directly in industry, in businesses, in homes to produce hydrogen. In transportation, sort of the development of an advanced, affordable, scaling up renewable electricity industry is a no regrets solution, and it will enable hydrogen, but it's something that if you do that, it enables every other piece of decarbonizing your economy. So I see it as a no regrets step forward that Chile is really well positioned to accomplish.
Muchas gracias, María. Max.
Thank you very much, Max. General message of an energetic transition related to this global crisis that we're living? Well, as a planet, we need to be able, pretty soon, we need to be able to abandon our dependencies from fossil fuels. And we need to find, and we need to be aggressive. We need to have plenty of leadership to find solutions which will allow us to leave this dependency on carbon fuels, fossil fuels. We need to use electricity, storage. We need to have different technologies. All of them have some space here, and hydrogen, it is one of them. And as Marcela well said, for this to happen here in Chile, as a country, we need to be able to agree upon the path to go. We should all go in the same direction, because this is not a need of an administration. This is a need, a state policy, and we should all be involved. We should all be pushing for it, because this is a common goal, basically that. Marcela? Well then, final message, because I have said everything I just wanted to comment, but I see in this opportunity, in the hydrogen economy, I see a possibility, concrete possibility for this to be a driver of innovation here in Chile, which is going to permeate to the whole ecosystem. And effectively, as in this topic, we're not getting or having late in comparison with other stakeholders in the world. So therefore, I like to call for this to be a policy, cross-sectional policy, which allows many stakeholders, universities, training centers, technological centers, startups, entrepreneurs, all of them should join this revolution so we can have that dream. We can achieve the dream of sophisticate our productivity with many different companies, small companies, agile companies, creating new technologies, innovation for the use of the whole hydrogen chain value. And we may also think that we could be able to export technology and services from Chile to the region and towards the world. So we need to dream big. And we need to be realistic too, also, with some roadmap which are concrete, and we need to create incentives and the public supports for this to turn into a reality. Thank you very much, Marcela. There are many different elements that, of course, present or may present a huge opportunity both for Chile and also for California. So thank you. I want to thank all of the panelists on behalf of the Chile California Council, Minister of Energy. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar. And I want to thank the public for being with us. This is the last webinar of the cycle, but there will be a second cycle covering different topics, and we're going to go deeper into this one. And I want to thank our sponsors, as I said at the beginning. Thank you for promoting initiatives like this. Good afternoon to everyone, and see you soon.